Some people spend their lives trying to disappear. Others are erased by someone else. But every so often a person leaves behind so many clues that the greatest mystery isn't how they died. It's who they ever were in the first place. This is The Other Side of Normal. There we are, welcome back. Do it every week, for fuck's sake. Welcome back to The Other Side of Normal. Tonight's story doesn't begin with a murder, it doesn't begin with a missing person, it doesn't even begin with a name. Instead, it begins with a question. How is it possible for someone to travel across Europe for months on end, checking into hotels, crossing international borders, carrying expensive luggage, speaking several different languages, and then die without anyone in the world being able to say who the hell they were? You know? That's what's going through my mind. So there wasn't a missing persons report, no grieving family stepping forward, no passport that led anywhere, no fingerprints in any database. You have to be with me. I'm suffering really bad with hay fever right now. If I sound a little bunged up, that's why. So yeah, no fingerprints on any databases either. Just a burned body lying alone in a Norwegian valley. If that sounds impossible today, imagine how impossible it seemed back in the 70s. Europe was divided. The Cold War wasn't just politics. It was like an invisible battlefield. Every week, intelligence agencies recruited new agents. Military secrets were bought and sold. Double agents disappeared. Governments denied operations that everyone they knew existed. Norway found itself in an uncomfortable position. It shared a border with the Soviet Union while remaining a loyal member of NATO. That made it strategically valuable. The coastline was watched, naval bases were watched, its missile development programs were watched, and inevitably, the people moving through the country were watched as well. Against that backdrop, one woman arrived in Norway. No one knew at the time, but over the coming months she would use multiple identities, leave behind coded notes, wear disguises, travel constantly and check into hotels under different names. Then, on a freezing November morning, she just vanished. Or perhaps she had never really existed in the first place. Chapter 1. Death Valley. Death Valley. On Sunday, 29th of November, 1970, the skies over Bergen were grey and cold. Winter had almost arrived. The forests surrounding the city were quiet, apart from the occasional sound of running water cutting through the rocky landscape. Just outside Bergen lies a steep, isolated valley called Isdalen. Today is well known throughout Norway, but long before this case happened, locals had given it another name. As I said, Death Valley. Sound like Vecna. William So the nickname wasn't supernatural. It came from experience. The terrain was very unforgiving. People occasionally wandered into the valley and never found their way out. Others slipped on wet rock faces or became trapped as darkness fell. It was a beautiful place, but it did demand respect. That Sunday, a man and his 2 daughters decided to spend the afternoon hiking there. There was nothing unusual about that. Families had explored the valley for years. As they climbed over scattered rocks, one of them noticed something black lying ahead. From a distance, it looked like discarded clothing, perhaps like a burnt blanket or something. As they moved closer, the shape became unmistakable. Someone was lying on the ground. The man immediately realised this wasn't a camping accident. It was a body. Police were called to the scene, obviously. When officers arrived, they found one of the strangest deaths in modern Norwegian history. The woman lay on her back between large rocks. Most of her upper body had been severely burned. Her face was almost unrecognisable. Her arms were positioned awkwardly beside her. Around her were scattered possessions that appeared to have survived the fire. There was an umbrella, a wristwatch, fragments of clothing, rubber boots, a melted plastic bottle, jewellery, and nearby investigators recovered the remains of sleeping tablets. The smell of the smoke still lingered in the cold air. Nothing suggested a struggle had taken place there. But equally, nothing about the scene made immediate sense. Who starts a fire in such a remote place? Why here? Why alone? And perhaps the biggest question of all, who the hell was she? Theory number 1. At first glance, investigators considered the possibility of suicide. The burned body, the tablets, the isolated location, it all seemed plausible. Cases far stranger than this had eventually turned out to be exactly what they first appeared to be. But experienced detectives know something important. The first explanation is often the easiest. Not necessarily the right one. As officers photographed the scene, they noticed details that refused to fit together. Some personal belongings appeared almost carefully arranged. Certain objects had escaped the flames, while others had been almost completely destroyed. The fire itself seemed oddly localised, and despite searching the surrounding area thoroughly, police found no handbag, no identification, no documents, nothing that could tell them who she was before she died. That absence would soon become the defining feature of the entire investigation, because over the next few days, detectives would discover something absolutely extraordinary. This woman hadn't simply travelled without identification. She had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure nobody could ever identify her. And that changes everything. For 3 days, investigators searched for one simple thing, a name. Every police force starts in the same place. Who is the victim? Find the victim, and you usually find the motive. Except this time, there was no victim, it was only a body. No one recognised her face. No one reported a missing relative. No identification had been found at the scene. It was as if she had stepped into Norway from nowhere. Then came the phone call. Staff at Bergen railway station had noticed 2 suitcases sitting unclaimed in a left luggage locker. Abandoned luggage wasn't unusual, but what caught their attention was the timing. The description matched items investigators believed could belong to the unidentified woman. Police opened the cases expecting answers. Instead, they just found more questions. The first suitcase was packed with expensive clothing. Blouses, dresses, a tailored coat. Everything was neatly folded. And the second contained more personal belongings, like your toiletries, cosmetics, shoes, maps, timetables for the railway stations, several pairs of glasses, a small notebook, but nothing unusual. Until detectives looked closer, every clothing label had been removed, not just the obvious ones, brand labels, laundry labels, tailors labels, even tiny manufacturer tags stitched deep inside the seams had been carefully cut away. It wasn't like hurried work. Someone had taken their time here. Metal spoons had identifying marks scratched away. Uri Geller's on the scene. Wonder if they were bent. Anyway. The labels on bottles had been partially removed. Anything capable of tracing the owner back to a shop, manufacturer or country had either disappeared or had been deliberately damaged. Investigators had never seen anything quite like it. It suggested planning, patience, and just the sheer determination to leave nothing behind. As detectives continued searching through the suitcases, they discovered something else. 5 100 Dutch mark banknotes. Deutschmark? I think it's Deutschmark. I'll do that again. 5 100 Deutschmark banknotes. Nailed it. Thanks, guys. They weren't playing in a purse. They weren't lying in a purse. Playing? Where the fuck did I get that from? They weren't lying in a purse. They weren't tucked inside a pocket. They had been hidden inside the lining of one of the suitcases. It was an old smuggler's trick. Money hidden in places most thieves would never think to search. Whoever packed these cases clearly understood concealment. And the woman was also carrying currencies from several other European countries. That wasn't especially unusual for international travellers, but combined with everything else, it painted a picture of someone constantly moving between borders. Among the belongings were wigs. More than one. Today that might not seem remarkable, but in 1970 it really was. Witnesses at different hotels had remembered the woman differently. Some described dark hair, others insisted it was lighter. Some recalled it tied back. Others remembered a completely different style. At first, detectives assumed witnesses simply had unreliable memories. Now, the wigs offered another possibility. Perhaps every witness had been telling the truth. Perhaps the woman they remembered really had looked different each time. Then comes the notebook. Investigators opened a small notebook. Inside were pages filled with seemingly meaningless combinations of letters and numbers. No complete sentences, no diary, no addresses, just rows and rows of coded entries. I need a drink. Initially, they appeared impossible to understand, but police cryptographers kept returning to them. Eventually, a pattern emerged. The codes weren't random. They represented dates, places, hotel stays, travel routes. The notebook wasn't recording thoughts. It was recording movements. Once decoded, it revealed months of travel across Europe. The woman had visited cities throughout Norway before travelling elsewhere on the continent. She moved frequently, sometimes staying only a day or two before disappearing again. Why? No one knows. As the investigators contacted hotels across Norway, another extraordinary pattern emerged. Reception staff remembered her, not because she caused trouble, quite the opposite actually. She was polite, quiet, amicably dressed, like me. She usually paid in cash, not me. She often kept conversations brief, that's like me. But there was one problem. She never seemed to be the same person twice. At one hotel she registered under one name, at another a completely different name. Eventually detectives linked at least 8 separate aliases to the same woman. She gave different occupations, different backgrounds. Sometimes she claimed to be a travelling sales rep. Other times she suggested she worked in antiques or fashion. Yet despite the change in identities, the handwriting on registration forms was remarkably consistent. And so were her movements. The names changed, the woman didn't. Hotel employees remembered something else. She appeared comfortable, just switching between languages. German, French, English. Some believed they also heard Flemish. I don't even know what that is. Is there a country called Flem? Nah. But no one could agree on her accent. To one witness, she sounded French. To another, she sounded German. Others thought she was Belgian. It was almost as though she belonged somewhere and nowhere. So, the evidence now presented investigators with a contradiction. If this woman wanted to disappear completely, why keep such a detailed record of her travels? If she wanted anonymity, why use expensive hotels where staff were likely to remember her? If she wasn't trying to hide, why remove every identifying label from everything she owned? The answers depended entirely on one question. Who was she working for? Or perhaps, who was she hiding from? At this stage, police still had no evidence that she was involved in espionage. None. But the unusual travel patterns, the multiple identities, the coded notebook and the wigs, and the deliberate removal of identifying marks were unlike anything most detectives had ever encountered before. The investigation was beginning to move beyond an unexplained death. It was becoming something much darker. By now, investigators had established one thing beyond doubt. The woman had spent months moving across Europe under multiple aliases. She had deliberately concealed her identity, she had travelled alone, and now she was dead. The only way forward was to retrace her final movements. Fortunately, she had left behind something invaluable. People remember her. Using the coded notebook alongside hotel registration records, detectives began reconstructing her final weeks. But it wasn't easy. Each hotel knew her by a different name. Each believed they had hosted a different guest. Only when police compared dates, handwriting and physical descriptions did the pieces begin fitting together. She travelled light despite owning expensive luggage. She rarely stayed anywhere for long, 1 or 2 nights, occasionally 3, and then she would disappear again. Staff consistently described the same habits. She dressed smartly, she kept herself to herself, She avoided unnecessary conversations with people. She usually paid in cash. When completing registration cards, she wrote carefully, almost deliberately. Nothing appeared rushed or accidental. Several employees recalled that she would often spend evenings alone before leaving early the following morning. She wasn't behaving like a tourist. She visited very few attractions. She took remarkably few personal possessions out with her. It was as though the hotels were simply stopping points between destinations that only she understood. Her last confirmed hotel stay was in Bergen. Staff later recalled that nothing seemed especially unusual. She appeared calm, polite, composed, again, like me. Yet one member of staff remembered something curious. When asked routine questions, she occasionally paused before answering. Not because she didn't understand, because she seemed to be deciding which version of herself she intended to present. If true, it suggests that living under different identities had become second nature, not something she struggled to remember, something she had rehearsed. Meanwhile, forensic pathologists were carrying out a meticulous examination. The results complicated the investigation immediately. Inside her stomach, they discovered approximately 50 sleeping tablets. A barbiturate, commonly described as a sleeping medication at the time. The tablets had not fully dissolved, indicating they had been swallowed shortly before the death. Toxicology also revealed significant carbon monoxide in her blood. More importantly, there was soot inside her lungs. That single finding changed everything. It proved she had still been breathing after the fire had started. She had not died first and then been burnt. The fire formed part of the sequence that led to her death. Doctors also documented bruising around her neck. They could not determine exactly how those injuries had occurred. The marks were genuine. Their cause was not. They might have resulted from an assault, or a fall, or could have occurred during the fire itself. The evidence simply wasn't conclusive. Officially, the cause of death, I should say, became a combination of barbiturate poisoning and carbon monoxide inhalation. Whether she chose that fate or whether someone else chose it for her remains unanswered. At first glance, suicide appeared possible. She had taken a large quantity of sleeping tablets. She had travelled under false names and no identifiable family. Perhaps she wanted to disappear forever. But investigators quickly encountered problems with that theory. If someone intends to end their own life, why remove every identifying label from every possession? Why hide money inside suitcase linings? Or carry multiple wigs? Or spend months moving methodically across Europe? None of those questions disproved suicide, but they made it increasingly difficult to accept as the whole story. Police began considering another possibility. Perhaps whoever this woman really was, her death wasn't the mystery, her life was. As newspapers covered the strange case, more witnesses contacted police. Several remembered seeing the woman in the company of unidentified men during different stages of her journey. Description varied. Some men appeared well dressed, others were described only briefly before disappearing into crowds. No witness could positively identify any of them. One taxi driver later recalled driving the woman shortly before her death. Years after the investigation, another witness claimed to have seen her walking near Isdal accompanied by two men. The account attracted enormous attention, but like many memories recovered decades later, investigators could never fully verify it. it remains an intriguing lead, not an established fact. By late 1970, Norway occupied an uncomfortable position on the geopolitical map. To the west stood NATO, to the east the Soviet Union. Norwegian military facilities were of obvious interest to foreign intelligence services, missile development programs, naval installations, radar stations, testing grounds. As detectives plotted the woman's known movements across Norway, some locations appeared surprisingly close to areas of military significance. Was that meaningful, or merely just a coincidence? At the time, no one knew. But for the first time, investigators quietly asked themselves a question they had previously avoided. Could this woman have been involved in espionage? There was no evidence proving that, no intelligence files or intercepted communications or a confession, only an unusual collection of facts that seemed increasingly difficult to mistake. And sometimes that is exactly how the most enduring mysteries begin. Not with proof, but with patterns. And those patterns refuse to go away. By the beginning of 1971, the investigation had reached a standstill. Police had reconstructed the woman's movements, they had catalogued every possession, interviewed hotel staff, questioned drivers, compared handwriting, studied photographs, examined fingerprints, yet they were no closer to answering the simplest question: who the hell was she? As conventional leads dried up, attention shifted towards a possibility few detectives had seriously considered when the body was first discovered, and that being espionage. To understand why that theory gained momentum, you have to understand Norway's position during the Cold War. Although often viewed as peaceful and politically stable, Norway occupied one of the most strategically important locations in Northern Europe. It was a founding member of NATO. It shared a border with the Soviet Union. Its long coastline provided access to the North Atlantic, where Soviet submarines regularly operated. Radar installations monitored aircraft approaching from the east. Naval facilities tested advanced weapons systems. Every major intelligence service had an interest in what happened there. That didn't mean every mysterious traveller was a spy, far from it. But when investigators looked at the Isdal woman's known movements, they noticed something difficult to ignore. Several places she visited happened to coincide with locations where military activity was taking place. Was she out there collecting information or meeting someone? Or was it just another coincidence? Even today, no one knows. One of the most discussed theories centres around Norway's secret penguin anti-ship missile programme. During the late 60s and early 70s, the missile represented an important military development. Testing took place in Western Norway. Years later, researchers noted that some of the woman's recorded journeys appeared to sort of overlap geographically with areas connected to those tests. It's an intriguing observation, but that is all it is. There's no document proving she witnessed missile trials, no intelligence file identifying her as an operative, no surviving evidence linking her directly to military secrets. The timing and locations have fueled decades of speculation. They have never proved espionage. That distinction matters. Another enduring question concerns Norway's own security service. Some researchers believe intelligence agencies became involved shortly after the discovery. Former officials have hinted that aspects of the investigation were treated unusually. Certain files remain unavailable or heavily restricted. Whether that's sort of reflects genuine national security concerns or simply routine archival practice is impossible to say with certainty. The existence of missing or restricted records has inevitably encouraged further speculation, but restricted files are not evidence of conspiracy, even though I'd like to think they are. There's just simply another unanswered question. For many years, the Isdal woman faded from public attention. Then, advances in forensic science changed everything. Investigators realized techniques unavailable in 1970 might finally succeed where traditional detective work had failed. Her remains were re-examined, all evidence was reviewed, items recovered from the suitcases were studied again using modern technology. And the hope was simple. Perhaps science could discover what paperwork never had. One of the most important breakthroughs came from an unexpected source: her teeth. Human teeth preserve chemical signatures from childhood. The water we drank, the food we eat, the minerals present where we grow up. Together they leave behind tiny chemical fingerprints. Scientists analysed those fingerprints using isotope testing. The results suggested the woman had probably been born around 1930, give or take several years. More surprisingly, they indicated she likely spent her earliest childhood near the region around Nuremberg in Germany, before later moving into a French-speaking area. This fitted some witness descriptions. It also explained why identifying her accent had proved almost impossible. She may genuinely have grown up speaking more than one language. That wasn't a disguise. It may just have been her life. Modern forensic teams also extracted DNA from preserved evidence. Combined with facial reconstruction, investigators hoped relatives somewhere in Europe might finally recognize her. Public appeals generated thousands of responses. Families wondered whether she resembled a missing aunt or a sister, a cousin who had vanished decades earlier. Every serious lead was investigated. None produced a confirmed identification. More than half a century later, the Isdal woman officially remains unidentified. One decision made in 1970 now seems remarkably forward-thinking. Rather than burying her in a standard coffin, authorities chose to zinc-line her coffin. The reason was practical. If future technology ever made identification possible, her remains would be better preserved. At her funeral, police photographers quietly documented everyone who attended. The hope was that someone might unknowingly reveal a connection to the woman. Almost nobody came. There were no grieving parents, husband, children, or friend willing to claim her. Only officials and curious onlookers. And an unnamed woman whose life had become one of Europe's greatest mysteries. But before we finish, it's worth separating what we know from what we think we know. So here are the facts, right? A woman was found dead in November 1970. She had travelled across Europe using numerous aliases. She carried a coded notebook. She removed identifying labels from her clothes. She had loads of wigs. And she died after taking a large quantity of sleeping tablets and inhaling carbon monoxide while the fire was burning. Despite one of Norway's largest investigations into an unidentified person, her true identity has never been found out. Everything beyond that requires caution. Was she a spy? Possibly. Was she involved in smuggling? Perhaps. Was she running from someone? Equally as possible. Was her death a suicide? And that remains the official conclusion. Was it murder disguised as suicide? Some investigators have believed so, but belief is not proof. And after more than 50 years, proof remains frustratingly absent. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story isn't the fire, it isn't the coded notebook and everything else she had. She was a little girl, was born around 1930. She learned languages, she travelled, she laughed, she formed her memories. At some point she became someone capable of living under names that weren't her own. Then one cold November day she died alone between the rocks of an isolated Norwegian valley. The world has spent decades trying to discover who she was. Perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the real mystery isn't who the Isdal woman was. Perhaps it's why whoever knew her never came looking. Sometimes history doesn't lose people. Sometimes people erase themselves so completely that history has nothing left to remember except the mystery.